Hello and welcome to another episode of The Legal Breakdown. I'm your host, Jason Sansone with Sansone Howell Attorneys at Law, and I'm joined today by a special guest who I'll introduce more in depth in a minute. But friends, we are joined by Jonathan Krems of Liberty Legal Solutions, LLC. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jason?
I'm wonderful. I appreciate you joining us on the show, and I think we're going to have a very good conversation for our listeners.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Friends, we want to remind you, as always, that The Legal Breakdown streams on KTLV 1220 AM terrestrial radio. We thank them for being our host station. If you're not able to listen to KTLV 1220 AM locally, if you're outside of the reach of their radio antennas, you can listen through the TuneIn radio app, or of course we stream live on Facebook through the Sansone Howell Facebook page. After each episode, we turn it into a podcast and a YouTube video. That podcast can be listened to on the Google Play directory, Spotify, and what is now, as of the iOS 13 or macOS Catalina update, the separate podcast app on Apple. They've split off, unfortunately. iTunes is gone, no more. But there is a podcast app. You can also listen to the podcast all the same on that. Friends, you know, we've talked a lot on our show about bankruptcy, about debts, creditors, what happens when you get sued, how to deal with those types of suits and resolutions. We're going to back up a little bit. We're going to give you some proactive advice today so that we can avoid all those nasty, terrible things that we've talked about that unfortunately lead to my services. So the goal of today's conversation with Jonathan is to hopefully make it so that you, the listeners, never need to see me with a little bit of good proactive advice from him. So Jonathan is the founder and managing partner of Liberty Legal Solutions, LLC. He's a graduate of Oklahoma City University Law School, and he focuses his practice on the areas of business formation, transactions, and serves as an outside general counsel for small businesses and small business owners. Jonathan strongly believes that small businesses are the backbone of the economy in Oklahoma, and he desires to help each and every small business owner start their business off on the right foot and then help them grow to reach their maximum possible potential. Like we said, the goal being to never need litigation or bankruptcy services. In addition, Jonathan's Secretary-Treasurer of the Oklahoma City Commercial Attorneys Association and serves as a member of the Oklahoma County Board of Adjustment. When he's not helping his clients, Jonathan enjoys spending time with his family, reading, and working on his blog, named Freedom Friday, and being involved in local politics. So, what all can we tell our listeners and small business owners so that they never need me?
Well, that's an open question, but I think it really starts when you're starting your business. And maybe our listeners already have a business, and I can get to that in a minute. But if you're interested in starting a business, which many people are, I think that it really begins with choosing the right business entity, as I know you've previously discussed on your program, and as anyone who follows Freedom Friday, I've previously discussed in my blog. That's really where you need to have that entity protection that is so key and so crucial. Beyond that, you also need to make sure that your contracts are good.
So let's dig into the beginning, because obviously, like you said, that's where it starts. We're never even going to be to a stage of worrying about contracting if we don't lead off on the right foot.
That's
of course,
right.
That's having a business plan, that's
Yes.
having break-even analysis, all these things. But, you know, day one, we decide we want to be a business. Okay, maybe I don't go to the Secretary of State. I'm a sole proprietor. I go to the Secretary of State. And now I'm picking an entity type. Real fast, I want to pause because of my mistake. Friends, we want to remind you, both those people watching on Facebook or listening live on the radio, you can call in. If you've got any questions for myself or for Jonathan, we can take your calls live on the air. Hey, it's free legal advice. Both of us usually charge probably over $200 an hour. You can chat. You're not getting a bill. Take advantage of it, friends. 405 347-7238, or alternatively, you can actually post your questions live on social media. We can see those, and we can address and answer those as they come in directly. So I wanted to pause and remind everybody about that. Also, real fast, for Jonathan, let's make sure we give you his contact information. The show's over. You've got a question after the fact. Maybe you're watching or listening to this on YouTube or on podcast, and now you can't call in live because, of course, we're not actually going to be live on the replay. Friends, if you got questions for Jonathan, you need his services, you can call him at 405-509-9096. Once again, that's area code 405-509-9096. Or you can shoot him an email at his name, Jonathan, Jonathan, at libertylegal.ok.com. LIBERTYLEGAL. OK.com. So you got the contact information. I've got the screen up. I'm looking for your calls. Let's talk about those entity types.
That's right.
You know, obviously I know, but listeners may not. What does that mean? What is an entity type? And then give me a gist of what some of the pros and cons of the different ones if I'm looking to start a small business.
Well, obviously the first one that's really popular for people is the LLC, limited liability company. And depending upon what industry you're in, how many people are doing business with you in terms of, you know, is it just you, or is it you and a friend of yours, or maybe multiple friends of yours? An LLC is good for a lot of industries. There are some industries that it's not good for. In that case, you might be looking to incorporate as maybe a C Corp. Even after if you decide to do an LLC, you can still elect S Corp status, depending upon what I would suggest would be how much revenue are you going to be making, because it might not make sense for tax purposes. And I'm not an accountant. I definitely would advise your listeners and those watching on the podcast that in addition to seeking legal advice for their small business, they should be seeking accounting advice as well to help with those issues, because most of us who are attorneys, we're not accountants, and vice versa.
And I definitely see a lot of small business owners where that is probably the bigger place they get themselves in trouble. That one, a failure to plan of maybe not having a good entity type and everything is problematic. But even then, okay, I went to an attorney or on my own. I went to the Secretary of State. I got myself an LLC. I got an EIN with the government for a tax ID. I went out and I got my bank accounts. But then I didn't actually keep receipts of anything. I treated it like one pot of money. I commingled my personal money with my business money, and I have no idea how to file taxes at the end of the year.
Yeah, and that's the problem. You have to have your individual personal account separate from your LLC account, if that's what you're doing. And this is especially true if you're single member LLC, because you don't want a creditor to come back and try to pierce your corporate veil because you didn't keep formalities of your entity structure that you set up to begin with.
And friends, you know, what we're talking about, especially if you're listening on the radio, it's hard to see us. And so we want you to be able to visualize what we're saying. Remember, the company is not you. The reason it has protections is because it isn't just you. It's a legal entity. It's a separate thing. And so if you don't treat it like that, if you pay your mortgage out of the business bank account, you're going to lose some of those protections. And that's that piercing that corporate veil Jonathan just mentioned.
That's right. And it's piercing the corporate veil, but you could say it's piercing the LLC veil, or however you want to couch it. But you know, you're doing this to set up protections for you, so that if you have creditors, they come after the assets of the business and not your personal assets. So it's very important to choose the right business entity. An LLC fits a lot of situations, doesn't fit every situation. There are some where you might want to go with C Corp or something else. Those are the two most common elections. But a lot of it, you know, depending upon if certain industries, and I know you've talked about this on your program before, cannabis industry, LLC is part of it, but you really need that C Corp because of federal law reasons for the cannabis industry. And that's not really the scope of what we're here to talk about today, but we want to acknowledge that there are certain industries that an LLC is not proper just as your sole business entity.
What it gets down to, friends, is nothing is ever one size fits all. And if you're going to a good attorney like Jonathan, you're not going to get a canned response. That some attorneys who don't specialize exclusively in business areas like Jonathan does, or especially those that are non-attorneys that might sell forms and things online, you're going to get a one size fits all. You're going to get a canned answer of, I want to start a company, here's your LLC, here's your operating agreement, here's a few things. But it's not tailored. There wasn't input on, this is the type of business I want to be in. This is my life goals. These are the number of people I want involved. These are the assets I need to protect. This is how much money and revenue we plan to have. Are we going to have investors? Are we not going to have investors? When you get that information from a client, then Jonathan can make specific tailored responses for you.
Yes.
And so that sort of leads me to a good segue, because I think two biggest complaints I often hear, and I guarantee you hear, about business formation, and even more specifically contracts, because that was our next step. You talked about, we've got to form the company, we've got to have good contracts. The two complaints I readily hear when it comes to good contracting is, one, obviously, I can't afford it. That I'm a small company, I can't afford to be going to a lawyer all the time every time we need to review it. And number two, biggest complaint is, oh, that's not the industry norm. We just don't do it that way. You don't understand, roofing industry, contractor, small business. We do it on a handshake. It's about a relationship. We don't need all this paper. I get those two complaints all the time. Now, of course, the easy answer is you can't afford not to do it, because the reason we're talking is usually because you're suing somebody or they're suing you.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it have been great if you'd bothered to talk to us first? But how do you handle that situation, Jonathan?
Well, let me take it apart the opposite direction. So the second thing you said about is that this is not how you handle it in the industry. I don't know if I've heard that before. But if someone came to me and says, well, we handle it differently in our industry, I was like, well, why do you need a lawyer then? If you think that you're smarter than me, that's the risk that you're going to take. Now, cost-wise, one of the things that my law firm offers our clients are subscriptions. So, and I'm not going to go into the specific details of each of these plans, but we do offer a subscription program for our clients where they can pay a certain dollar amount per month that offers them a certain modicum of legal services. And that can include review of contracts for a certain amount of contracts per month, and also drafting of contracts. But some small businesses, they deal with, the biggest thing is vendors, and they get sent a vendor contract and they don't understand it. And that's when you need to call an attorney such as myself and ask them, hey, how much would it be for you to review this? I'm not going to charge you, if it's just that, I'm not going to charge you an arm and a leg. Some lawyers might go downtown, might charge you an arm and a leg, but it might be worth your time and an investment in your business for you to call a lawyer and say, hey, can you review this contract for me before I sign this, because I don't understand this.
And so to put some real-world examples to the listeners, what are the negatives? What harm can happen if they sign something they didn't understand? What have you seen where vendors slip into these contracts that people don't realize?
Well, I think that they need to pay attention to the terms and what kind of liability that they would expose themselves to if they sign this contract. Many of them have mandatory arbitration clauses, or, limit your remedies if the vendor does not come through and, provide the service that they're supposed to provide, or give you the product that they're supposed to give you. And so you need to be careful with that. Those are some of the areas that I would go to on that. And I'm sure there are others.
I'll tell you the two biggest things that I see on our end, because again, unfortunately, you're usually only coming to me when things have already gone very, very south. But the biggest thing that I see for employees in companies, or even possibly the ownership that didn't realize it, is personal guarantees, that it's extremely common to have trade agreements where you didn't realize that, oh, yeah, no, it's normal. We're just doing a deal
Or
with
leases.
Fastenal. It's a lease agreement. And I think a lot of people expect them in things like a lease, but what they don't realize was just, oh, yeah, we signed up for an account so we could buy a bunch of paint or we could buy a bunch of widgets. But then all of a sudden, when that company closed, I'm just an employee, I'm done. Oh, wait, no, they're suing you personally for the collection. The other thing, of course, which you don't always have a lot of control to negotiate, choice of forum, choice of law clauses. You're doing business with a big company. What you may not realize is when you sign that vendor contract, they're going to say that the law is some other state and any litigation has to be some other state. So now you need to sue them or they need to sue you, and you go to Jonathan and you say, hey, I want to sue these guys, and for the first time he gets to look at your vendor contract. Well, I can't help you. I'm not licensed in California.
Yeah. And maybe I can help you if that's not an issue, but yeah, if it says that this is enforceable in California, that's going to be a problem.
Folks, I can say that I have successfully had cases dismissed in Oklahoma that were filed against clients in Oklahoma when the choice of forum or choice of law clause was another state. And seems funny, but it works. And so, you got to be careful with what the correct jurisdiction in those contracts are, because they are absolutely enforceable under Oklahoma law.
That's right.
So we talked about formation. We talked about contract. What would be the next thing if I came to you as a small business owner that I need to be thinking about of coaching towards success?
Well, a lot of it has to do also with the size of your business and what kind of business you're doing. You definitely are going to want to look at any licensing, sales permits, things of that nature. If you plan on hiring employees or contractors, that's another big area. Maybe the business is just you and this really doesn't apply, but you need to be careful how you classify those you hire to work with you. Are they an independent contractor or are they an employee? There's tax ramifications for that. There's legal ramifications for that. And that's a big issue. Besides that, you also need to look into, are you getting business insurance coverage for your business, especially if you're going to look at any kind of property. If you're going to actually have a physical location for your business, hypothetically, if you will, if you're going to open a florist shop, you need to have business insurance for your premises, because if you get sued because someone comes in and slips and falls on water in your florist shop, you don't want to be personally responsible for that, and your LLC formation isn't there to protect you for that necessarily. It's very good to have an insurance policy in place, because then your insurance company can come in, they can hire defense counsel and help protect against that loss and that liability.
So I'm deciding to start a small business. I didn't take your advice. I don't have an accountant lined up, and I'm just going to do everything on my own. So, I don't really understand all this accounting jazz. I don't want to have to worry about making paychecks and tax withholding. So, I just decide that everybody that's going to work for me, I'm going to make them a 1099 contractor. I'm going to make you an independent contractor, and I'm just going to give you straight cash. I'm not going to withhold anything out of your check, and that's up to you. Can I do that? What's the problem there?
You might be able to do it. It kind of depends. How much control of their work do you have? Because if you're going to treat them like an employee, and again, some of this is industry specific, you can't do that. Now, if they're truly an independent contractor where they have control over their work, that's a different situation. But you can't pretend that someone who you would normally treat as an employee is an independent contractor, and the IRS will come after you if you do it wrong.
As will the Unemployment Security Commission of Oklahoma, the Workers' Compensation and Department of Labor. As Jonathan touched on, friends, the number one element for determining an employee as opposed to an independent contractor is scope of control. Who's in charge of determining what they do? But to run through all these various breakdowns and elements, when you're thinking about, can I make someone a contractor or are they employee, who provides the labor and materials?
Right.
Do you or do they? Do you pay them by the job or do you pay them by the hour? If you pay them a fixed package, that's going to indicate more of a contract labor. But if I'm trying to pay you on an hourly basis, no, that's an employee. I've got to pay you based on the job.
Yeah.
Are they using your transportation or their own transportation? Is it normal industry norm or not is something that's going to be looked at, as opposed to is it commonplace otherwise to have them be employee or independent contractor. There's more. There's 12. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. That scope of control, though, really is the number one factor of if I tell you where to be, when to do it, how to do it. A normal office setting, you need to be here from 9. You got to leave at 5. That's an employee. On the other hand, hey, you can do the job however you want, whenever you want, wherever you want. I'm going to pay you per the job. I hire someone to come paint my house. They tell me when they're going to show up, and they take whatever time they need to take because I'm paying them for the job. That's a contractor, not an employee. Just depends on all those variables and factors. Yes, you can get yourself in a good bit of trouble, though, if you
That's right.
try to skirt those games. So, we've covered a lot of great information. We're about 2/3 of the way through our show. We've got 10 minutes left. What are some of the other things that you think necessary to impart to our listeners if I was doing a consult with you that you'd make sure we understood in forming an entity and moving forward as a small business?
I think the other thing that I want to talk about is regardless of whether or not you're incorporating or you're forming an LLC, if it's just you, that's one thing. But if there's more than one person involved, you really need to hammer out as part of your operating agreement or your bylaws, if you're corporate, a buy-sell agreement. And that doesn't have to do with buying and selling businesses. That is a provision that's agreed to of, what happens if there's a dispute between the owners of the business? Also, what happens if something happens to one of the owners of the business? I don't like to be morbid with your listeners, but it's a possibility one of you might become incapacitated or pass away. How are you going to plan for that? That needs to be discussed up front.
Absolutely, because what you've got to remember, folks, is it's almost like a marriage. When we're talking about going into this company, we're talking about the same as a marriage. And any estate planning professional, any marriage counselor, they're going to tell you similar types of advice, which is you hope for the best, you plan for the worst, and so you need to have a power of attorney, you need to have a will, maybe a trust, you need to have life insurance. But the point is, when you go into a marriage, you obviously voluntarily picked your spouse. You said, that's the person I want to be with. But you didn't say that, should they pass, I'm okay being with their cousin or their brother or their mother. And so, same in the business. If we go into this and we've got a business partner and they are incapacitated or they pass, or maybe they just want out of the company and they want to sell their stake, do they have the right to? Does that bother you? Do you now want to run a closely held small company with someone you didn't plan to go into business with?
Right.
And that's the considerations, isn't it?
It is. And that's going to change depending upon the situation. But the more people who are involved, the more complicated it is, and all the more why you need to consult with an attorney.
Absolutely. So what would be some of the options, of course, that we would have available in either the bylaws or the operating agreement if we wanted to restrict that ability to transfer either membership or stock of an S Corp, C Corp, LLC?
Yeah, let's take a C Corp stock situation just as an example here. You can have a first right of refusal that you have to offer it to the company, that the corporation buys the stock back from whoever the owner is. And in that case, they will have the control of selling it to who they want to sell if it's closely held. If you're doing an LLC and it's just two people, maybe your decision is the surviving person is just 100%, and you just leave it at that, and then they have control over the company. But that's, again, something that you need to consult an attorney on how to actually word that in your bylaws or your operating agreement, so that, like I said, in case something happens, you know how this is going to be handled.
When you're setting up an LLC with only two partners, or truthfully, friends, we've been using different terms. They're called members when we have an LLC. But so when we have two members for a limited liability company.
And a member is an owner of the limited liability company.
Right. Do you recommend they be 50-50, or do you recommend that one member in it, when there's only two, have a majority?
I recommend that I don't necessarily recommend one way or the other on that. I think a more critical question is, if it's two or more people, do you want to be a member-managed LLC, or do you want to be a manager-managed LLC? Now, if they want to be a manager-managed LLC, that's going to solve some problems. If they want to be a member-managed LLC and they are 50-50, I'd probably ask them to second-guess that, but it, again, depends upon the situation, because if it's their spouse, maybe that's what they really want.
We've got about 4 minutes left, but I want to go into that. Explain the difference between member, manager, and manager.
Okay. So an LLC can be member managed or manager managed. A member of an LLC is the owner. If you're member managed, then you as the owner or owners are managing the daily operations of your company. If it's manager managed, then either one of the owners or a third party or a board, any of which can become the management of the daily operations of the company. But you have to designate that in your operating agreement or your bylaws.
And so what we're basically saying, friends, is if you have it separately managed, not member managed, we've alleviated a problem, because the person that with the crown could be one person, president, CEO, or a board, but we've vested control where there's the ability to have that separate. As I was sort of with the leading question, if you have two members and they both have equal management authority of an LLC, you can see that we create the ability for gridlock if they're 50-50.
Right.
And then when we reach an impasse, how do we solve that?
Right. And that's something I would approach them with, but in some cases that might be appropriate if, say, you're going in with your spouse. I mean, that's something that you have to look at. In some situations, that might be appropriate. If it's just you and another business partner, I would recommend actually having 3 people.
Exactly. So that way, virtually no matter what, even when we have 2-1 decisions, we always are going to have some majority or minority, or hopefully 3-0 unanimous, but we're not going to have 50-50 gridlock.
Right.
We've got about 2 minutes left. What are some final parting thoughts, recommendations, or again, things people should contact you about, Jonathan?
Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me on the program. I think that the best advice that I can give your listeners is, if they're interested in starting a business, they need to consult an attorney. And if they have an existing business that wants to grow, or you're contemplating some major structural changes, or you're having issues, problems, you need to consult an attorney. The sooner the better. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Absolutely. I think that's been great. I want to list it one more time, friends. This has been Jonathan Krems with Liberty Legal Solutions, LLC. If you want to call him, you can at 405-509-9096. And Jonathan specializes in helping small businesses both form and, as he pointed out, continue to grow. And although we made the joke earlier, when we say grow, we don't exclusively mean marijuana, although we can help you with that as well in Oklahoma to avoid some of those federal issues. Friends, once again, this has been Jason Sansone with The Legal Breakdown. Be safe. Have a great week. Hopefully the weather stays about like it is right now, although it's going to get a lot colder. Have a good week, friends.